My name is Zach, and I have the honor of introducing Minh Tsai, founder and CEO of Hodo Soy, who's here to talk about his journey from investment banker to tofu master and the growing popularity of tofu and soy products here in America. I first met Minh several months ago, taking a tour of his tofu factory in Oakland with a small Google group, and I wanted to kind of bring this to other Googlers in Mountain View who weren't able to make the tour. It was very inspirational and eye-opening for me to see firsthand how he grew this thriving business from the ground up with his passion for great tofu and his kind of risk to leave a financially stable position and pursue his dream here. So it's found everywhere in Michelin star restaurants to the aisles of Costco and Chipotle sofritas and our own Google cafes. Hodo Soy is revolutionizing our understanding and appreciation of tofu here in America, and Minh is really leading that. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you. All right. So I have about an hour, right, Zach?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So it's up to you how you want to spend that hour. I can spend a whole hour talking about my transition from investment banking to tofu. I can talk about tofu making, history, economic, chemistry. So let's do a show of hand, okay? How many of you want to know about my story? Okay. How many of you guys want to know about tofu making and taste good tofu? All right. Okay. So why don't we focus on those two areas, and then I'll weave in the history and all of that. And I'm going to try to do that while I'm cooking at the same time, which is not an easy task. So let's keep on this show of hand business. How many of you guys knows where tofu comes from? Soybeans. Excellent. Good answer. That was an easy one. What about geographically where it comes from? China. Great. Yes. And how long ago have we sort of discovered, so to speak, tofu? Anybody want to venture to guess?
4,000 years ago.
Yes, that's pretty good. Nobody really knows, but 4,000 is close. And guess what? That's pretty much roughly around the time that we actually have a recording of people eating beans, any kinds of beans. Any of you guys eat beans and cook beans at home?
Yeah.
How do you cook beans? Go ahead. How do you cook beans?
Boil in water?
You boil in water for how long?
Forever.
Forever, exactly. Well, the guy who discovered tofu did it the exact same way. So if you actually read about any history of tofu, which I know you haven't, but don't worry, because in a few months, Olivia Wu's going to bring in the guy who wrote a book of tofu. I highly encourage you guys attending his talk because he wrote this amazing book that talks about the history of tofu. But he doesn't know where tofu comes from either, so we're all speculating. But essentially, somebody, somewhere, is cooking beans the same way that everybody cooks beans. You soak it, because you get the dry beans, right? And the reason it's dry is because we want to store it for a long time, and the more mature the beans are, the higher the amount of protein in the beans. So universally, we all eat beans, and we eat it in a similar fashion, which is we soak it and we cook it. And the reason we do that is because the beans themselves don't want us to digest them. So there's this thing called the Ipsin inhibitor, which means in our body, we don't have all the enzymes and everything chemically to absorb all the nutrition of the beans. As such, we have to cook it, because if you eat raw beans, like uncooked beans, you can't digest it. You're going to have a lot of gas. Okay, so we cook it the same way. So he'll come back, and I have to save this part for him about where it comes from, because this is like the raison d'etre of tofu. But yes, so it's an accidental discovery. Okay, and I'll tell you why in a minute when the chef comes back. In the meantime, I'll just skip ahead and tell you tofu in America. How's that? So I said earlier, there's this guy named Bill Sherleft. He wrote the book of tofu, and it was published in the US in 1976. Some of you might even have it at home. But it's a seminal book about tofu. And in it, he talks about how it's made, where it comes from, the amazing varieties of tofu, and he essentially ushered in the first generation of Westerners eating tofu. Thank you, Chef. So now we skip away from Bill and come back to the guy making tofu in Asia. So he's cooking a pot of beans, and he's probably not very well versed in cooking it, so he had some excess water. And then he didn't want to waste it, so he drank that, tasted it. And it didn't taste that good. It tastes kind of beany. So, and then he thought, oh, maybe I'll add something to make it taste better, like salt, the first natural flavoring. He added salt, and it tasted better. So you have a savory soy milk kind of thing, savory bean juice. And he started thinking, well, maybe I'll add something else, like vinegar. That's another flavor. And he added the acidity of the vinegar, and what he discovered is this protein became a solid. So the first Chinese word for tofu, it's actually called douhua, which means the flour of the beans. And you see me do that, demonstrate that later. So when you drop any acid into any protein, doesn't even have to be, it could be cow milk even, it becomes a curd. So what he essentially created was the first bean curd. So that's an accidental discovery of tofu. So we, if you read the history book, it says some prince wanted to impress the emperor and introduced it, and none of that is probably true. Probably some accidental discovery. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it because I'm the tofu master now. So now going back to Bill Sherleff to introduce tofu in the US. Some of you heard this before, but so tofu was consumed in Asia for thousands of years, and then it basically went from China to Japan, Korea, all throughout Southeast Asia. And it followed all the Asians, or the East and the Southeast Asians that travel beyond Asia, like to the US, to Africa, everywhere. And so tofu was brought along. So when Bill Sherleff wrote the book of tofu in 1976, it wasn't like tofu didn't exist in the US. It was around for 100 years before Bill wrote the book, because the Chinese and the Japanese have been here farming and building railroads. And they have tofu in sort of the Asian supermarkets. But then the Westerners really don't shop there, and even if they did, they didn't know what it was, if they could find it in the grocery store in the first place. So, but Bill wrote this book, and everyone thought, oh my God, tofu, awesome. I want to eat tofu. Where do I find tofu? And the trouble was, you couldn't find tofu in the US after you read this book, this amazing book about how delicious, how amazing tofu is. And so people, Western companies, started making tofu. Okay, so basically he introduced tofu, and people couldn't find tofu. So most people who were brave enough would go to Japantown and Chinatown and buy tofu. And imagine this scenario if you're buying tofu for the first time. Your friends is telling you, oh, this is amazing, you should go to Chinatown and get it. You go to Chinatown, you venture into a grocery store, and you're looking around for what you think is a white block. Because in the book, it didn't have any photo, just a drawing of a block of tofu. Okay? So you've never seen it before. So you go and you're looking for a white block. And you look on the shelf, you don't know how it's packaged, and you couldn't find it. So you probably go home and you tell your friends, I couldn't find it. Or if you're brave enough, you would actually go up to the checkout stall and say, I'm looking for tofu. And then the person at the checkout stand, because tofu is tofu everywhere, right? The word is the same in Chinese in any language. The person will understand you and say, oh, tofu. And you say, yes. And then he would say, okay. And he would grab a plastic bag, if you're lucky, and he'll put it around his wrist, and he will stick his hand under a bucket, right next to him, and pick up a block of tofu in his hand, and reverse the plastic bag and tie and hand it to you like a block of goldfish. Now, if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, he'll just ticket you with his hand and put it in the plastic bag. Okay? But that is how most Westerners experience tofu for the first time after the publication of the book. So you take the tofu home, and you're like, okay, what do I do with this? And often at the time, either you pan fry it or you grill it. And if you happen to be grilling something and you bring it home for a vegetarian eater, you throw it on the grill, and of course it's going to fall right through because it's a jiggly, jello-y like a block, because it was not the firm tofu that we're used to eating today. So after the Western companies started making tofu in the early 80s, what they decided to do is actually make the tofu and then pressing it so that it's firmer and firmer to become more meat-like. So we, Americans, are very innovative. We invented the firm and the extra firm tofu. And the reason we do that is because 30, 40 years ago, we don't have the Food Network. We don't have a lot of culinary programs. People just don't know how to cook as well. We just came out of the whole, ready-made food, canned food in the 50s, which people didn't know what to do with food in general. They, were eating a lot more industrialized food at the time. So cooking was not something that people do at home so much, and also definitely not tofu. So most people didn't experience tofu the way it needed to be experienced, which is like, oh, what is it? So now you have Western companies making firm tofu to be more meat-like. Where I'm going with this is because the whole book introduced tofu as a vegetarian food. And I usually joke that it's kind of like writing a Match.com profile and saying, I went to good school and I have a good job and I'm smart and I'm fun, but never say I'm good looking. Like I'm hot. Because the way he introduced tofu, he didn't really say it tastes great. And unfortunately for him, in the book of tofu, the people who subsequently made tofu didn't make a great tofu. And it's not their fault, because they were making a vegetarian food first and foremost. They were making a meat substitute. But they were also making a tofu as a very unusual and new food that economically need to align with what tofu cost in Asia. So they were also making a cheaper tofu. So between the introduction of tofu as a vegetarian food, between the economic of tofu, most people actually don't want to pay more for tofu. So tofu cost about $1 a block 40 years ago. It's about $1 a block today. So when you look at the economic of tofu, there is a disincentive for anyone making tofu because there's no market for it. So you have a whole generation of people who are really enthusiastic on eating tofu and then encounter poor experience eating tofu and then raising kids who are like, no way, I'm not touching that. My mom made terrible tofu turkey. So you can't blame them to not eating tofu, and you can't blame tofu for not sort of rising. There are many other types of food that are very similar. Like, I bet most of you guys don't know that lobsters used to be a prisoner's food in the 50s. Nobody wanted to, it wasn't a gourmet food until a gourmet chef decided to make it a gourmet food. Same with calamari. People didn't want to eat squid, until someone called it calamari. It sounds so much better. Sushi, same thing. People didn't like eating raw fish until somebody came and said California roll. But now people are going back to eating raw fish again, pure form of sushi. So food comes in these really funny cycles. Tofu is the same way. It was introduced, and it wasn't very well thought out in the introduction process. Because Bill, again, when he wrote the book, it was more about saving the planet. It was about eating a plant-based food that's going to save the planet, because we're having all kinds of issue raising enough food for the rising population. So it was really, and also it's the time, right? Like today, you guys are much more conscious, not just because you're here at Google, but you're in California, you're in the Bay Area, and you want to know where food comes from. You want to know about health and nutrition. There's so much more information, out there, thanks to you guys. People are much more conscientious today, and they can access information a lot more. And it really, from the culinary standpoint, it really helps people, to really understand cooking and nutrition and everything else better. So while Bill is a product of his time, and tofu and other forms of food back in the days also go through that funny sort of like acceptance frame, Hodo is a product of our time, of my time. So we're very successful if you look at us and you don't know who we are, and you're like, oh my God, Hodo, Chipotle. We've been around for 10 years, but it's only been the last 5 years that we began to see the rise of tofu consumption again. Because after the introduction of tofu, what you have is a scale, a chart where a lot of Western tofu companies were built, and then the industry started on a decline. And it continued to decline until about 10 years ago. I'm an economics student, so when I started to think about making tofu, I was very crazy in that I wanted to make a delicious tofu that I grew up eating in Vietnam. So for me, that had to be the case. Like make a tofu that tastes good, because I couldn't find good tofu. But I also understood the economics of tofu, which I'm going to go into now. Wow, this is still getting warm. Perfect. So tofu as an industry in the US, after the rise of those Western tofu companies, people discover that it sort of had this really interesting split. You have some companies that just are mom and pops companies, small tofu makers, very similar to Asia, which is you make it for that community. And then you have companies that wanted to grow, and most of these tend to be Western companies. They want to distribute beyond the Bay Area, beyond their community. So you have this split between small mom and pops and then company growing big into multi-million-dollar businesses. But what's different is that all of these companies, despite the fact that they have an economic split, they make very similar tofu, which is a cheaper form of tofu because of that competition. Like your mom and pop shop can make better tofu, but they would, because of no economy of scale, they have to make it as competitive as the tofu you would find in the supermarket. So if you have $1, you need to figure out whether you want to spend it in the supermarket or locally, assuming you can find it locally. So tofu making, you'll see in a minute, and you can also go on Google and find a lot of videos of us. It's really interesting because you can't be somewhere in the middle. You either are a mom and pop, or you really have to grow to be sustainable, because of the investments required to build a production facility. You cannot make tofu in small scale. So you have to make it in big scale, and there are sort of industrial safety standards, like a boiler, for example. We have rules here that, if you want a boiler that generates more than 5 horsepower of steam, you need like this massive room that's bulletproof, and when it explodes, nobody gets hurt. So a lot of tofu makers, when they cook their soy milk using steam, had to either be under 5 horsepower, most of them are, or way bigger. So that's one example I want to give you in terms of how you build. And also it's very labor intensive, to make tofu, because there's no, to mechanize it costs even so much more. And you would have to spend $5 million to start a tofu business if you want to mechanize everything. So because of that split, you have the small guys and you have the big guy and nobody in between. And the small guys are always struggling to survive, and the big guys basically dominate the market in the grocery store chains. And at the time, chefs don't really use a lot of tofu. So you basically have a retail market that essentially dominated by the big guys. So they dictate the price, the texture, whatever tofu you're getting. And you have the little guys who basically, after the first generation, like San Jose tofu, like the kids don't want to take over the business because it's really hard work. And we've seen this over and over again. Like I pretty much know, 60% of all the tofu plants in the US. And, I hear this story over and over again. While I'm trying to get people to build tofu business, they're going under faster than I can get people to build it. And the reason for that is purely economics. So when I started this business, in my mind, because of my banking background, consulting, and economics, I knew that I did not want to build a small plant, but I also didn't want to build a big plant. I want to build something right in the middle, because if I'm correct, which I have been so far, this is the hardest space to be in. So that's my barrier to entry to starting my business. Okay, so it doesn't mean I don't want somebody else to do what I do. I would love to have another business doing what I do, because I think the industry is young enough that if you have people making delicious tofu, you get more people eating it. And I've proven that because most of our customers initially are actually new to tofu. And how we began to think about winning our customers is focusing on taste and not on everything else that people are focusing on, vegetarianism, veganism, meat substitution, any of that, or health even. So what I ended up making is a tofu that tastes, hopefully to you as well as to me, really good. And that takes us into the whole chemistry of tofu. So to make a good tasting tofu, how many of you guys have traveled to Asia and eaten tofu there? China or Southeast Asia? Okay, Japan. So excellent. Did you eat tofu or any form of tofu when you were in Japan or China?
For several years.
Okay, there you go. You want to be sitting here answering Q&A later? And was it delicious when you ate tofu in Asia?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you find the same type of tofu here?
Trader Joe's actually isn't too bad.
Okay.
And San Jose tofu is fine.
Exactly. San Jose tofu makes great tofu. I agree. So it's really not that easy, at least for me. I have very high standards for tofu. So I couldn't find it. That's why I decided to make it. But one of the first things you need to do to make good tofu is actually the soy milk. Because people are not familiar with the taste of soy, your first introduction of soy milk is probably Silk, which is a very successful company. And they managed to basically take all the flavors of soybeans out. Okay? And make it taste as close to cow milk as possible in order to sell soy milk. So that's a battle I'm trying to basically go against. And right now I can say I'm winning today, but for the last 9.8 years, I've been losing. Because what I'm trying to do is actually make people enjoy the flavor of the beans. And in Asia, when we eat a tofu and we drink soy milk, we wanted that. We want, this is really beany. This is really fragrant. So when I make a tofu, that's what I emphasize on, because I didn't want it just to sell it to people who think of tofu as a meat substitute, who can cover up whatever, just you add flavors to it, and that's the flavor you're eating. It's just a vehicle for that flavors. I hate it when people do that. Like eggplant is a vehicle for flavors. Tofu is a vehicle for flavor. No. Every single one of these items actually has a distinct taste. You just haven't had an opportunity to taste it. So that's what we do at Hodo, is as sort of tofu ambassadors, we want people to say, oh wow, I didn't know that tofu has a taste. And not only that, I didn't know that it can taste this good. So that's what we try to do. And to do that, we need to make a yummy tofu. So we start with the soy milk. To get really good soy milk, you need a thick soy milk. It's kind of like whole cow milk versus skim milk. Most tofu companies today, because of economics and yield and whatnot, use something much akin to a skim milk to make tofu. And you can do that because you add more coagulant and it becomes a chalkier tofu. So that's essentially the difference. Really good tofu is very pliable, which means that you actually favor the milk more than the coagulant. The proportion is different. Like for our tofu, we use about 1% coagulant. Most tofu use probably closer to 4 or 5%. And you can see it in the protein level if you look at the nutritional panels of tofu. you buy our firm tofu, it will say about 16, 17 grams per serving. Most tofu don't even get to double digit. So the whole soy milk. So that's the first thing we do. And all of our soybeans, we actually source from farmers in the Midwest. We contract them to grow it for us every 12 months. So we work with a large cooperative, and we probably source from a dozen different small organic farmers. And we'll commit to that going forward. So do you guys have any questions so far before I launch into tofu making and talk more about chemistry? Nobody's falling asleep yet? Yes.
Organic, so you're not sourcing GMO products.
We are everything we source is 100% organic and non-GMO. All of our ingredients, wherever we can. Like if it exists, we'll get it. We are the most expensive tofu, but it's not very expensive, relatively speaking. So, all right. So what I have here is soy milk. This is the soy milk we use to make tofu. And what I needed to do is I needed to heat it up first. And when I heat soy milk, what I have is yuba. This is, and some of you have seen this, this is essentially the cream of soy milk. You know, if you drink Strauss milk, you still get the cream that rises to the top. This is essentially the same thing because cow milk has all that protein. The difference is, chemically speaking, is this is a much more pliable, flexible piece of sort of cream versus the cow milk cream is much more brittle, so it doesn't have the elasticity. So this can be manipulated into all kinds of stuff like you guys had for lunch today. So I'll put this aside.
There's some cups here.
No, yeah, put it in one of the cups. Yeah, somebody can eat it. It's yummy now. So to make tofu, besides the milk, we need a coagulant. You see how this is sort of settled? This is gypsum, the plaster of Paris, as they call it. Except this is, so plaster or gypsum is actually a mineral. It's basically calcium sulfate. This is a pure food grade form, so don't worry. And we use this because this is the original coagulant found in Asia, in China. And it's a mineral in the ground. And the reason that the Chinese started using this is because they also flavored the beans themselves. This is one of the few minerals cheap enough that to get that does not mask any of the beans' flavor. It brings it out. It allows it to stand alone, the flavor of the soybeans. If you go to Japan, you may have had a tofu that's made with what we call nigari, which is magnesium fluoride, which is a byproduct of sea salt. And the reason the Japanese use that is because they actually didn't have a lot of calcium sulfate in Japan, so they had to use a different coagulant. And the chloride there sometimes leaves a slightly bitter flavor. That's why some people originally call that that coagulant bittern. The term bittern is from that. I'm shaking it up because calcium sulfate is not a water soluble. So I need to sort of keep it mixed so that you see why. Any questions so far? No? Mesmerized? Just kidding. All right. So normally, this is where my colleagues are like, don't you need to measure this out? I'm like, I'm a tofu master, man. I know how much this is going to take. Watch me screw this up good. All right, so I have that. And I'm going to pour some in here because it's not a water soluble, I need to mix it somehow. So besides mixing it here, when I pour it in here, when I pour the soy milk in there, it needs to mix as well. So this is where the tofu master title comes in handy. Don't do this at home without supervision. So I have the calcium sulfate in there, okay? And as you can see, it's already settling again, but that's okay. So the milk needs to be heated. And the reason we need to heat the milk is when you heat any liquid, the atoms are flying all over the place. That's what we want. So when we pour it in here, we want those atoms to start, to be loose and start binding with the calcium sulfate. That's essentially. So I have a gallon of soy milk here, and
What temperature do you heat the milk?
great question. So it needs to be roughly about, I usually heat it beyond kill step, which is 165. So when it's super hot, it doesn't help either. So generally it's about 165 to 185. And so here is the hard part. Actually, I'm going to do it here so I don't hurt myself. And you can see better too. I'll bring it up front. So you have the coagulant here. And when I pour it, I want to pour it in a steady form. So there's somebody said, which is true, the hardest tofu to make is the softest tofu. And I'll explain why in a second. So I'm going to pour it, and I want that pouring to be mixing that calcium sulfate in there without splashing. I want you guys to applaud when I'm done. See, it's actually mixing naturally. Where's the applause? Thank you. So if I did a better job, you wouldn't see the bubble on top. And the reason I say the hardest tofu to make is the softest tofu is if you get this wrong, it's not going to be that smooth. It's going to be like what I said, the flour, like chunks. You know, you have some protein that didn't really coagulate with the coagulant, and you basically lose some of that protein. So here, in about 1 minute, it's already forming into a solid. And the reason that it's harder to make this is if I mess this up, which I didn't, I can always just pour all of this into a cheesecloth and squeeze it, and it becomes a firm block of tofu. See? But so if I don't get this right, I can still make firm tofu, but I cannot make soft tofu. I have to a completely new batch. So here, I would jiggle it. See that? Now, you have a choice. Oops. Nobody told me. You have a choice. You can eat that, or I can make it into tofu.
I want to eat that. That's not tofu?
This is tofu. This is silken tofu. Okay? Now, to make it in a block of tofu, I break that up. I put it in this really beautiful brick, wooden mold with a cheesecloth, and I turn it into a block that big. You can eat that tofu too. But I can tell you from personal experience that this might be just the most delicious tofu you've ever eaten. And if we have time, we do. I can make another tofu thing. I'll boil some more soy milk. So you guys want to try eating that? I highly recommend. So I'll leave you to the serving.
Sure.
It is, yeah. So, excellent. Yeah, that's the experience. So imagine me growing up in Asia. There's another spoon if you want to use it. Yeah.
How big should these scoops be?
Oh, you can have bigger scoop because people are going to want bigger pieces. That's perfect. Yeah. When I grew up in Asia, somebody walks around with like a basket, yelling tofu, and that's what they were selling hot with a little bit of ginger sauce or something. But I didn't want to give you guys ginger sauce because I didn't want to mask any of that flavor.
So what is the method of making the soy milk? Is that you boil the beans and then
Great question.
grind it or something?
Yes. So to make tofu, to make soy milk, we basically soak the milk overnight until it's completely rehydrated, and then we grind it into a slurry, like a mush, similar to sort of like an oatmeal mush, and then we cook it at very high temperature so that it's cooked, and then we separate the beans from the pulp, and then we extract the milk. This is a very traditional method of making tofu because in modern day tofu making, for efficiency's sake, some people just soak the beans, grind it, separate it, and then just cook the milk. But we actually have a double extraction process where after we cook the beans, you know, we actually don't throw away the pulp. We actually rinse it again to extract a second time to get more flavors out of it. So that's what we do to maintain. What do you guys think? It's pretty amazing, right? Yeah. So.
It's better than what they serve here. How do they ruin it?
Hey, you're sitting next to a chef.
But he doesn't serve tofu.
No, the thing is, well, you can make that here. You just need to buy our soy milk. And in fact, some chefs have done it here before. So, and again, you know, you have the opportunity to eat it like made on the spot. But if I leave that, and you'll see in a few minutes, that will actually start leaching water soon. So tofu, so here what I started out was a bind, like what I would say close to a perfect bind, meaning that I'm not wasting any soy milk or any of the coagulant. You know, if I put too much coagulant, you know, it's going to be chunky. If I put too little, it's not going to be a smooth cream. So because I'm a tofu master, I got it down. But over time, that bind will actually start splitting, and you're going to get water as a byproduct. So tofu leaches water all the time. That's why when I talk to the chefs at Green's restaurant, they've been around, they've used tofu for a long time. They buy our extra firm tofu and they marinate it in a broth for a whole week. And it's still only on the surface. So I talked them into using our tofu because I said to them, I said, at least after people eat your delicious flavoring marinade, they still have a delicious tofu underneath. Because before, you had a delicious flavoring marinade, but you had a terrible chalky tofu underneath. So that's the goal here is, for the longest time, I didn't want to make a firm tofu because it's so hard to work with. You know, because people don't know how to use it. The firmer it is, the harder it is in terms of textures and flavor for people. But finally I said, okay, people really want a firm tofu. How can I make a firm tofu that actually tastes better? And at least better to me. And if you actually do a tofu taste test with our tofu against other firm tofu, you will actually taste the following. You will taste first a really beany, nutty flavor because it's there. I don't try to hide it. And secondly, you taste a slight sweetness of the beans themselves that you won't taste in other tofu. So you see a nutty, beany, buttery sweetness to our tofu, and that's why, you know, I think people begin to buy our tofu, and it's only a matter of time because you get a better tofu from Trader Joe. If I have my ways, which I think I do. Oh, that's being recorded. Everything's recorded these days. Yes?
So what's the difference between using sprouted beans or just...
Oh, you ask all the best questions. They planted you here. Okay, sprouted. Okay, how many of you guys eat sort of like sprouted stuff? Okay, I love sprouted stuff. Okay, I love any kinds of young shoots, like whether it's vegetables or anything that's young. It's just tastier. Okay, but here's the problem with sprouted when you cook. What happens when you cook something sprouted? All that nutrition is gone. It's the most brilliant tofu marketing I've ever come across. It's so true. So what happened was, again, it's totally accidental. I've seen this. We've soaked beans, and we couldn't use up the beans because the machines are down. So we don't want to waste like 300 pounds of soybeans. We stick it in the refrigerator overnight, over the weekend. Okay? Sometimes we forget about it. And guess what happens when we forget about it? Exactly. Do we want to throw that away? No, we don't. But we still process it the same way. We still cook the heck out of it. Okay? So all that nutrition of raw and sprout, it's gone. But it's brilliant because the company that came up with it, and I won't mention name, that's exactly what happened. Their machine went down. Most likely they had tons of soybeans, and you know, it took them a week to fix a machine, and they have sprouted soybeans, and they used it anyway. And so, but nutritionally speaking, there is no advantage, unfortunately. But any types of bean sprouts, because what happens is when a bean itself starts sprouting, the chemistry of that bean changes, and it allows for better absorption. Nuts, same thing. You know, legumes, all legumes, when it's sprouted, it's saying, okay, I'm gonna give up now. You can eat me, and you can digest me much better, right? But then if you're gonna go ahead and cook me, then all of that, it's, you know, no. So, but I love the marketing. One day we're gonna come up with sprouted tofu too. When I have enough space to actually let beans sprout. So, but that's a great question. Any other questions before the next batch? Yes?
Your facility is in Oakland?
Yeah, and we actually, we used to give tours. We work a lot with Bon Appetit to give tours, but we're growing so quickly that we sort of took over the tour space, which is about this size, and now it's our employee lounge. So in a few months, we'll co-opt it back, and we can do more tours. And I've come down and done, you know, culinary classes with chef down here before. Olivia Wu, who's a huge advocate of us down here, talk to her. She'll bring me down. I don't say no to her. So yeah, yeah, and usually for that class, I actually I do a little bit more in depth about textures and flavors, and I'll have handouts and stuff so you can understand. Because I don't do a lot of consulting because I don't. Most chefs don't actually ask a lot of advice because they've gone to culinary school and I'm not a chef. But I'm happy to provide any advice when it comes to tofu. So, okay, we're almost ready for the next batch. Can somebody do me a favor and actually pour this out because I can't use that up anymore. Yeah, I just need a
You need this poured
yeah,
out?
yes, please.
Okay.
That you can leave. So if you can pour that out somewhere, that would be great.
This is like that birthday cake.
Yeah. You can just eat it. Yeah, can you guys see the water there? That's leaching out. That's essentially what happened. It's not hot. It's lukewarm, but it's still good. Tofu does not get spoiled because when you finish making the tofu, it's still at what we call like not in the danger zone. So when it comes to any types of food, you know, they call it 140-40. So you want it to be below 40 degrees F or above 140 degrees F. Anything in between, it's when the food is more susceptible to contamination. So the beauty about tofu is that when you make it, it's above 140. So then the trick is, how do you get it from 140 to 40 as quickly as possible without it getting contaminated? Okay, most people don't think about that. The reason they don't care is because most tofu is consumed that day. It's not like, you know, they don't leave it longer. And then another way you can sort of get away with that is if you put a block of tofu in water, it pushes water out, and if you keep rinsing that water in the bucket, then that tofu, you know, has fewer opportunity for contamination. But tofu goes bad really quickly, especially if you use a high protein tofu. So our tofu, if we make it the same way as other people and we treat it, will go bad faster. But fortunately, we are very hygienic. And so we actually have the longest lasting non-pasteurized tofu in the world. Not because we put some chemicals or anything in it. It's because as soon as the tofu comes out of the cheesecloths, you know, that's the first time that somebody's touching it and has the probability of contamination rises. That's where we're most vigilant. You know, the tofu cutting board, the knife, the gloved hand, they need to be changed. The cheesecloths, one use, blah, blah, blah. And so as soon as it comes out and it gets cut, we put in a package and we cool it down very quickly. So our tofu will remain relatively fresh and tasty after 25 days. And even the largest companies that make tofu cannot do that. because not only the whole process is different than ours. So we're very proud of that, the ability for us to make a tofu that will last and stay fresh for a long time. So, any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have questions because I went to Greens this weekend.
Oh,
Tofu.
lucky you.
Awesome.
The brochette. Yes.
And how does your tofu get to Greens? Or to restaurants? You come to them and say, we have this great tofu, we want to put in your restaurant, or they reach out to you and say, we hear you have great tofu, we want to use it?
Good question. So as a company, I will confess to you, I'm a terrible salesman. Okay, I hate sales, but I'm a good teacher. So I think the success of our business is because I care about teaching people about tofu. And I always try to get the bigger guys with money to be like, hey, you need to really explain to people what the heck tofu is and how to use it and all of that, but they don't. So Greens is the same thing. They've used tofu before us. And I basically say to them, I'm like, how about I come in and I teach you about tofu? And you know, they also came to us because we're at the farmers markets. I can talk a little bit about sort of that whole career thing, if that's of interest. What happened is, I started as an investment banker in the early '90s, and what I discovered, I'm an immigrant kid, so I came from Vietnam, and I came here in 1981, and I was very fortunate to have gone on to really great, schools and all of that. So when I came out of graduate school, I wanted to work in the Peace Corps. I wanted to do development work, actually, because I was a beneficiary of so much, of the UN and UNHCR. But at the time, most of the professors that I encounter in my graduate program came from really large organized institutions, like the Peace Corps, or IMF, or the World Bank. This is a time way before like Grameen Bank and microfinancing and community financing and community development. So most of them said, dude, you're a young kid, you have no experience, you don't speak French, which is the lingua required to work in those international fields. You should just go to the Peace Corps and just volunteer for 3 years. And I couldn't do that because I had a lot of debt. So I said, okay, how do I still do what I do? So I managed to talk my way into investment banking, because they needed a lot of investment banker at the time in Asia, in Hong Kong. And the project they had me on was to build telecommunications businesses. So this is the beginning of wireless communication. So, and in telecommunication, there's a universal access clause that requires any builder of telecommunication to designate a certain percentage to people who normally cannot access it. Kind of like, if you live in the countryside, there's no reason for me to connect you because you don't bring any economic benefits to me as a company. But by law, I have to do that. And so that's the piece that I hooked myself into in investment banking. So I did that for a few years, and I really enjoyed it because I got to travel all over the world, building wireless. I had like a brick of a cell phone back at the time. But I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. But it wasn't the right culture for me. And I left investment banking because I learned a lot. I went from one group to another, like from equity to M&A to debt and all of that. So it was, oh, no wonder. Oh. 2 minutes. You might not get to see tofu. But I learned a lot, and but I got bored as well. And so I quit because I didn't know why my bosses were making so much money and still working so hard. No, it's true. They wanted me to work at Christmas. I still remember, and I said, I was like, no, I'm going home. And they're like, no, you have to work. And I was just like, so I kind of pissed about it. And then when I came back and worked, I found out how much money they made. They were making $25 million a year, and they worked Christmas and New Year. So there was a discongruity to me. So I was like, whoa, something weird. So I was like, I can't do that. If I even make $3 million, I wouldn't even be here. So I left and I went to management consulting because I wanted to continue to work in telecom and learned. So in that process, between when I started my professional career to when I quit was about 12 years, I saw 4 recessions. It's like recession. 3 years later, recession. It was the dot-com boom, and then burst. So I was really disillusioned by all of that because as my career was taking off, I realized that America is not the meritocracy that I thought it would be. So that's my final disillusionment before I started my company. Because I never got laid off, but every time that happened, I saw that the people, my colleagues, you know, they stay because of a lot of politics within corporations, and I was never politically astute from that standpoint. So in the end, I just thought, you know, it's not fair, so I left and decided, to the chagrin and the disappointment of so many people, started Tofu. People really thought I was crazy. They're like, you're throwing away your career. You know, what are you thinking? Like, what is tofu? Why are you doing tofu? But in the end, I lucked out. It worked out. So I'm very lucky, and has so much to do with timing. The timing at the farmers markets. You know, the fact that I decided to start at the farmers markets was a stroke of pure luck. Because people there had money, so they didn't mind paying for more expensive tofu. They were very curious about food, and the farmers market proliferated. You know, today you have about 200 farmers market a week in the Bay Area. Did you know that? When we started out 10 years ago, there were like 20. So there's a tenfold growth of farmers markets. But it's not good for the farmers, because now, while it's good for you to roll out of bed to get it anywhere you want, that farmer has to go to 10 markets to make the sales of that he normally sold at maybe 1 or 2 markets. So it's, you know, it's good and it's bad. All right, any other questions before I make the final batch of tofu? Yes?
Well, I'm curious, because as I said, when I see Hodo tofu on the menu here, and it's super firm and has a different flavor from what's here, so are you selling a different product, or are they preparing it differently?
I think
I need education.
I think it's not a different product. It's the same product. What it is I don't know how it's served here, so I can't really speak to that. But what I can say is I'm happy to come and sort of give a talk about it, because what happened, I'm afraid, is people do too much to our tofu. You know, people think because they still have the mentality, I have to fry the heck out of it. You know, I have to flavor it a lot. But if you just cube up our firm tofu and just lightly dress it, you know, whether it's hot or cold, it will do the tofu justice. I think we're just used to, like, because some people take our tofu and deep fry it. It's terrible. You know, you have a thick coating on the outside. Huh? Abrage? Yeah. Where's that tofu thing?
You don't like it?
Oh, good. I'm going to pour this in, and then I can make my, if you don't mind.
What would you like?
If you don't, just put that out. I'm going to pour this in there. Okay. Sorry to waste all that, but you can still eat it. But oops, sorry. All right. So here is our tofu. Oh, scientific. Okay, I'll do that up here instead of down there. So first I'm going to make the exact same thing that you guys saw, which is a silken tofu. And while that's happening, I'll set up this really nifty thing. So essentially, what I do here is I'm breaking up the whey. It's very similar to cheese making, separating the whey from the curd. So this is just a cheesecloth. I wet it because it's easier to fold when it's wet. That's always a trick question I ask people. Like, why do you think I need to wet it? It's just easier to manipulate. So very quickly, as you can see, I have somewhat of a silken tofu already. And then, this is the part where it's a heartbreak for everybody. You know, I started breaking it up. See, I didn't do a good job. You see how it's not very creamy here? When I rushed it, this is what the first guy discovered. It's kind of like these little chunks. So it's not fully silken. So that means as I use this, I'm wasting some of the cream or the milk remain. So now I basically will scoop these chunks in here, and then I will press all of this into a block of tofu.
So when you press it, are you pressing out like water?
Exactly. In this case, I will actually press out some of the remaining proteins as well.
And what makes it cling together? Like it comes out as like a solid block, but it's going in as like
You mean what makes it cling together here?
well, like
Or here?
when you press it, yeah, like when it's
Well,
gonna come out solid, right?
Exactly. The reason that it comes out solid still is because, as you can see, I'm doing this when this is still hot. So if I break out if I use that silken tofu there and I try to form this, it wouldn't work. Because that heat, it's almost like a second coagulation. That's what it is. And if you can do it, basically, you have to do it soon after the tofu or the silken tofu is made. Otherwise, it won't form again.
So your thickener is calcium sulfate.
Yeah, it's calcium sulfate.
Is there any other thickener that you can use?
You can, as I mentioned earlier, like nigari, which is magnesium chloride, is another coagulant. But
What about like lemon juice or vinegar? That doesn't-
any acidity will work. But it's also going to change the flavor of your tofu. Yeah,
Well, in
but
this case, this has got absolutely no flavor. That's why you're using it.
right, exactly.
Well, as I'm watching this, I'm comparing your process to how we make paneer. So
It's very similar.
I'm drawing
Yeah.
similarities. That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
Does the protein have a different texture when you use calcium sulfate? Because I only use that to make paneer. So
No, you use calcium sulfate to make paneer? No.
I've never done. I've used
Yeah.
lemon juice or vinegar.
Right. So basically, because the milk has protein, now I haven't tasted your paneer, but I'm curious, what is the flavor? Does it still retain some of the acidity of the lemon juice? A little bit,
When I
right?
make it, I mean, for the amount of paneer we use, but we use about almost 200 pounds at a time, so it's impossible to make it. So
Right.
I now get it, I source it, but
Right.
When I do make it for small batches,
You can definitely make tofu. You can actually make tofu like using lemon juice.
okay.
Yeah. So if you want to keep this and play around with it, yeah, please. Yeah. So no, I'm always happy. So then I just basically fold it into a nice little block. This is when we have our tofu classes. What we do, we let you do this yourself.
Where do you get these blocks from?
You can buy them on Amazon.
Okay.
And yeah, so put it in there. Let's see what happens. Sorry guys, no tofu for you. This should work. Sometimes when you add water, you can still make tofu. Forget the block here. This is where we innovate. We have a round ball of tofu.
That's how it's paneer.
That's how you make paneer. Yeah, it's gonna be like cheese.
Spin it.
There you go. See how that water? So if you look at the, I guess I pour water in there. But essentially, this is still pretty hot. But the clearer the water after the silken tofu is made, the more perfect the coagulation is, the gelling. So I need to do this. It's too hot. There we go.
If you add something like an acid, like lemon juice,
Mm-hmm.
what is the need for salt as well?
You don't need salt. Yeah. So my earlier explanation is he probably added salt and it didn't do anything flavor-wise. So or texture-wise, but when he added the vinegar, that's when it becomes. I'm so glad. I did not know that you use lemon juice to make paneer. Is that universal?
I mean, that's most of the recipes that I've used, and I'm just curious to see what would happen if I used calcium sulfite to make paneer.
You can still make it.
Okay.
Yeah, and it just tastes. You probably won't taste that sourness.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
of the paneer itself.
Have you ever
So-
tried flavoring the soy milk?
We have. I was telling these guys that we used to have what we call savory tofu, where in this process I actually add flavor.
So you boil, as you're boiling it, you also infuse it with
Not the milk, but in there.
in there.
Yeah, I cannot do it in the milk
Okay.
because it won't. If I change the chemistry of it too much, it won't reconstitute
I see.
the second time. Like in other words, if I manipulate that flavor too much, I won't be able to get a tofu block. So that's the challenge.
So you,
Sorry, go for it.
you had mentioned how you thought you would be able to make a tofu that was almost indistinguishable from paneer. I was wondering what sort of techniques you can use to change like the texture and flavor of the tofu. Like
Well,
what are
Actually, the texture of paneer and tofu, the difference is one is slightly more elastic, the paneer is more crumbly, not too much more. In order for me, so the flavoring is not, so there's a flavoring challenge and then the texture challenge. I think the texture challenge can be overcome if I use a different coagulant and I add some salt to it. Then it will be slightly more brittle. Flavor-wise, you cannot, unless you can remove the soy flavor, it will stay there. However, the reason that paneer tastes so good, for me at least, is how rich it is, how creamy it is, and because of the milk.
Right.
So I would have to use a really thick soy milk to do paneer. And that thick soy milk will have enough protein. And I would also try to find a soybean that actually has high fat. Because, not all soybeans are equal. So if I find a high fat soybeans, high protein, and I also would basically make a thick soy milk, then I'm closer in terms of the ability to flavor it, similar to the flavor. Similar to paneer. And then I'll start with that, and then I would basically work on the texture.
Well, I'm not looking, we don't want to have a brittle paneer.
A what?
We don't like a brittle paneer, because when we use it, we like to have it in perfect cubes.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it'd be fun. I'd love to come down and play around with you if you want. We can figure out a time.
I'm starting to enjoy it.
Don't you guys have some kind of food research institute here? You have all kinds of institutes here, right?
Yeah, it starts after 3 o'clock when my staff leaves, that's my stuff.
Okay,
Come on, have fun with me.
there you go. That will work, So,
You just complain the next day, like, what have you left us to clean up, Jack?
but here you have it, and you guys can taste it if you want. It's very different too, but you have here is a nice block of cottage cheese-like tofu. Look at that. Yeah,
wow, it actually has like the
that's
string.
the cloth. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. Go ahead and try it. Just take a spoon and dig in. This is yeah. No, if you salt the soy milk, it's harder to coagulate. You have to salt it after the second constitution. In other words, you make the silken, you break it up, then you add salt, and then yeah.
Then you,
Go for it.
That's good.
yeah, that's really good.
There's a really amazing article. I think it was written in 1980 in the New Yorker. Maybe even older. You can probably Google it. It's about this journalist who went to Japan to learn about tofu. It's a really well-written article. And how it ended was the tofu master invited her to his mountain retreat for the weekend. And she went, and she discovered that he was a wine connoisseur. And he went to his cave and he brought out a bottle of really expensive Burgundy white wine. And she was shocked. It's like $1,000 bottle. And she's like, "Mom, we don't have anything to go with this." And he said, "Yes, we do." And apparently, he served her some aged tofu. So, I think he's dead. Otherwise, I would visit him. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.